Hello there, everyone. It's Irene Lyon here. Welcome to this Q&A, this weekly Q&A. We've been doing these quite regularly in the new year in 2020. If you're watching this, you're probably on the replay either on Facebook, where I'm recording this right now live, or on the YouTube, which is where we put these videos up when they are done and complete. And I've got questions today. I'm going to do a little notice of a few things before we get started in here. Just going to make sure that everything looks good and running. If you're joining me right now live, let me know that you're here. Say hello. Write in the comments section. Tell me where you're from. I'd love to know where people are coming from today. There's a lot of energy, and there's a lot going on right now in my world, in my company's world, because once a year, I should say, we run my program, SmartBody SmartMind. It is a 12-week comprehensive group online program that I have created over the many years that I have been doing this work. I created it, just to give you a little insight, because I was in private practice working with people with all sorts of traumas and pieces that they needed healing. And it was feeling like I was having to educate and give practices over and over again. So the same education, the same theory, the same basic foundational learning I was using in these hour-long sessions that were, they were pricey. It wasn't cheap to come and see me for an hour. And what happened is once a month, every 2 weeks, even once a week wasn't enough for someone to really become an apprentice and a true master of their nervous system physiology, and to heal the traumas that we keep in our system for so long. And so what I did is I started to create homework assignments. I started to create audio lessons. I started to create those slideshows on PowerPoint. And I was doing live lectures in my office, cramming 30, 40 people into this small office. And I realized it was time to put all of this into an online program so that people, not just where I lived, who could see me one-on-one, but people all over the world can come in and learn and go at their own pace and get really a very comprehensive curriculum that I have been curating in my mind, in my body, in my practice, and in my life really for 20 plus years. So SmartBody SmartMind is about to open for enrollment on February 17th, 2020. It's open for enrollment for 2 weeks. We close registration at the end of day on Sunday, March 1st. And as I said, this is the only time we run it in 2020. So if you want to do the theory and the practice, the real deep foundational practices that I am known for and that I teach. We've had people from 63 countries go through these programs, thousands of people, results and success stories that are so vast and diverse that I can't tell you them right now. But if you are interested in working with me and my team, please head to the sites that I have. My assistant Crystal will post up that link so you can check out what's happening. And I'm being very diligent and repeating myself, because we get a lot of people at the end of registration who didn't know that this is something that I do. They only see these YouTube videos or these Facebook lives or my free resources, which are all wonderful and important, but they don't know there's another level. So I'm just being very deliberate when I start my calls over the next few weeks to say to you, this is happening really soon. It's changed people's lives. I met a lot of my students in Europe and in New York and in Vancouver and in California last year in 2019 when I was teaching my live workshops, which are called Up and Down. That's a whole other topic. We'll talk about that some other day. But I met a lot of people who had gone through SmartBody SmartMind, and tears and joy and just huge gratitude and thanks for the work that I've put out there and the team that supports me, because lives have been changed. People have gotten married. People's health problems have resolved after a lifetime of certain things. People have left toxic relationships. People have found new careers. They're improving their current career with this new lens and regulation of the nervous system. So it's super cool to see this work in action and to see literally from the trenches what's happening and all the diversity. So just a little kind of little quick promo there, shameless promo to let you know that that's what's happening. And the other thing that leads into SmartBody SmartMind, it's kind of like the unofficial prerequisite is the healing trauma video training. 3 videos, they're live right now. They actually, truth be told, they live on my website all year round. We don't take them down because I don't think it's fair to take that information away from anyone, even if we're not launching a program. But the healing trauma videos, there's 3 videos. They're all under an hour each. The first one is 35 minutes. Each video has a worksheet that is comprehensive. It's like a mini book. It's a real robust training. It goes through what I believe everyone should know who is living and breathing here on this planet right now in a Western world, living with the complexities of technology and cities and traffic and just living in this sort of unnatural habitat for us human mammals. So that training is 100% free. It's complimentary. You can start it today. You can sign up for it right now and get started. I will be doing some special calls on this training next week and the following week. All this information you'll get if you sign up. So we hope that you do. If you haven't already, if you have started the training, let me know. Let others know here how it's working for you, what you're learning. If you're one of my alumni, let me know too. I see some names that are familiar here. So hello, Sol from Norway. Hello from Melbourne, Florida, the Shuswap. Hey there, Sandy. Denmark, London. Let's see. Hello from Canada. Hey, Katarina. Also Stockholm, Sweden. Hello, Rachel. Okay, so those are my little preambles. I'm going to have a drink of some tea to wet my throat. And today I wanted to dig into some very specific topics. If you read the blurb at the top of this, I want to talk about why our biology is what governs a lot of our worlds as humans and not so much our biography. And there's some gray zone in here. So I'm going to talk about some of the gray zones, namely epigenetics. I'm going to talk a tiny bit about transgenerational, also known as intergenerational trauma. I want to talk about how we believe and we're seeing that the brain, this thing up here, everyone say hello to their brain, give it a little love. Seriously, join me. Just connect to this part of yourself and give it thanks because it does a lot for us without us having to think about things. So this brain of ours, how it is what some of my mentors are calling an end organ. An end organ. And as we know, the brain, if we didn't have this brain, we wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't survive. So it is important, and it is not the only thing that governs us human beings. Really, and I said this, I think, in a call maybe last week or the week before, we have to shift our viewpoint and our perspective of human healing, human evolution, gosh, even societal pieces, everything. We have to shift out of a very dualistic way of seeing things where it's black and white. If there's this problem, this is how we fix it. We have to look at the whole picture. And I know that this is becoming way more hot right now in pop culture, even, and in the media, and in healing and in health. Even environmental science, is that we can't just look at one thing. We have to look at the root causes and all the things that interact with that organism or with that community or with that country, or if we get really big, the entire earth. So, which is where we all are on. And sometimes I think we lose perspective of the macro level. And this is something I am becoming a bit more stringent at talking about, is the macro level that we need to look at when we're working with the nervous system. So I'm going to get into a question, and I see one right here, so I'll get into this while I'm seeing it. It's from Nicole. She has a similar last name to me, Lyon, but the animal, not the town in France. So she asks, I like the thought that biology and not biography govern well-being. With that said, though, doesn't biology partially shape, it's very wordy, all these B words. Doesn't biography partially shape biology, both in terms of how biology is first developed and then later maybe creating a maybe by creating new stories, how biology can reform. So you're right, and this is why I mentioned this is not cut and dry completely. It's not always black and white, but in terms of this idea of the biology. So right now, in this moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, we are all here with our biology, and I'm going to make a huge assumption, so bear with me, or a generalization, that most of us here, if we are struggling with some form of mental or chronic illness, maybe relational patterns that we're not really loving, behavioral things such as addictions that are not helpful to us, that the things that led us to this point in time, the way our biology is and even the way our behavior is, it's a result of something that occurred in the past. Would you guys agree with that? Let me know. So if that is true, the past is important. So the biography is important. And biography, I mean the story, the traumas, the things that occurred to us, right? The immense stressors, the adversities. Maybe we had surgeries when we were infant. Maybe we had a surgery when we were in utero, because that's something that occurs these days due to medical science. Maybe our parents were under high levels of stress when they were forming us, when mom was carrying us. So we know that the history is important. And we have to look at right now, how are we being with the biology that is there as a result of the history, of the past, of the traumas that occurred to us, the events that occurred to us, or maybe the things that didn't occur that we needed to form resiliency and regulation in our nervous systems as little wee human beings that are immature and highly needing attention and love and nurture and safety and food and shelter and all those things. So when we have, just get my screens right here. So our biology is what I am interested in working with from this point forward. And it's important to have an understanding of that biography. It does help when I work with someone one-on-one to know the history so that we're not guessing on what's happening. However, some people don't know their history. They don't know the biography. They don't know what occurred to their parents, maybe when their parents were young. They don't know if they were in a surgical arena when they were young. Maybe they never asked those questions of their parents, and the parents are passed or aren't in their life anymore. So we don't always have to know the biography to work with the biology, but it helps. The one thing I see people get caught up in my classes and in my programs, and even when I was in private practice, is the dwelling on the past, the staying in that victim role now. It does not mean that it doesn't mean that we were not victimized in the past or abused in the past, but the current point is moving forward and not dwelling on that biography, because when we do, it traps us backwards. Literally, there's a lot of B's in this call today. Behavior, biology, backwards, biology. I'm sure we could find a few others. So we want to really look at the current moment. And one of the things that'll come through and very strong and clear in these questions today is we need to learn how to be with our physiology, our biology now, because we couldn't back then. Usually because we were too young and too immature and didn't have the parental structure and the parental nurturing to teach us how to be with our biology when we were young. I hope that makes sense. So that's one piece to that, Nicole. And the biography, as I've just said, I'll repeat it, the biography, the history will dictate the biology. That's without a doubt, right? The environment, that classic nurture versus nature, or now it's being said nurture and nature. There's a reason why we say now not nurture or nature, or nature or nurture, we say and, because they both connect and they play together. So they're both important, and when it comes to healing the system and working with it, we need to do a first sweep, if we can, of what the history is, and then in many ways we need to let the history rest on the shelf over there so that it doesn't sidetrack us. Does that make sense? So that it doesn't pull us back into that history and not moving forward. Now, if when we're working on something, there is a memory that comes up, there is maybe a movement that comes out that is indicative of an old trauma that we are completing, in those moments, that's where we will use this higher brain of ours to say, oh, wow, this is that time that I tried to protect my head from falling on the ice and I couldn't. And now my hand is reaching up to protect this part of my brain, right? This part of my skull. We want to know that, but then we don't want to backpedal and go backwards into the drama and all of the things that occurred in that, let's say, shock trauma when we were younger. We may grieve the biography, which was no one was there, but without dwelling on it. So there's a, I love the word finesse. You guys know that word? There's a finesse, there's an art form to how we stitch together these biographies, the past experiences, the adversities, the real life crap that happened to us, pardon my language, and how we work with it in the current moment with our biology right now. So when I say why biology, why we are our biology, it's because we are what is happening in us right now. What's interesting is with the way that our mind is so strong, we can work ourselves into a frenzy and re-traumatize ourselves by being too caught in that past biography. And then it doesn't allow the system to be in the present moment, and it doesn't allow us to work with what is here. I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but it's one of these things that can be quite tricky and complex when we don't look at the nuance and the gray pieces of this. Okay. Thank you all for your comments. Hello, hello, Ireland, the UK. Heather asks, do you believe that we can inherit or carry forward the traumas of our grandparents, etc.? What they had, for instance, if they were in a fire, could we have carried forward their fears? Absolutely, 100%, yes, yes, yes. We know, the research has shown, and my sense is we're going to find that it's going to go further back even more, that we can carry these stress responses and those, again, this is where it's not so much the memory of, say, you give an example of the fire, but the stress response of what would have happened in that person's biology when they were confronted with something like a fire. I know from speaking to some of my mentors, namely Kathy Kane, we did a wonderful interview, gosh, almost 2 years ago now. We can post that here below. It's a longer interview, but it's really worth watching. She has taught me about 30% of what I do and teach within my program, SmartBody SmartMind, just to give her really respect and kudos, because she's walked the field before me and my colleagues. But the last time I spoke with her, she mentioned that the research is showing that the trauma and these stress responses can be carried back to 3 generations. So not our parents, not our grandparents, but our great-grandparents. My hunch is that that probably goes back even further. So a lot of this we have looked at in terms of Holocaust survivors. A woman by the name of Rachel, I might not get her last name right, Yehuda. Crystal, you're on live with me right now. You can find Rachel's name. I think she's out of New York, a university somewhere in the States. And she's really studied intergenerational and transgenerational trauma. We know through some of the research with animals, specifically rats, Michael Meany, who is out of the east of Canada, I think in Toronto, he has done research looking at the genetic imprint on rat pups. They're mammals like us. They have the same nervous system as us. Of course, their brain is not as complex as ours, but the way in which they respond to stress is like us. And he's looked at how nurturing young is more strong than the biology. So there's two pieces of science that these two people study that show, yes, we take on the genetics of our parents, obviously. I've got two parents and I have features from both of them, and that's just the way genetics work. That's the way our genes get passed on to us. And what's even more potent is what occurs to us when we are living and breathing in oxygen and in the gravitational field, and how we are treated by our parents, how we are being treated by those around us, the ways in which we are taught how to be ourselves and be with our sensations, right? Whether we were taught to be active little beings or if we were taught to be sedentary, that is going to play out into our adult life. So yes, we do know that this stuff passes on. Hello. Hey, Charlie. Good to see you. Hello, Fiona from Australia. Thanks for popping up that interview. Thanks for popping up Rachel's website, or it looks like maybe I think that's Krista Tippett's onbeing.org is a podcast with Krista Tippett. But if you look up Rachel and if you look up Michael Meany, you can probably find their science labs at the universities they work out of. All right, and hello, Kim. I see you've just joined. So I'm going to get to a question that was sent in. And I'm going to, let's see. This is from Alex Pappy. This was posted in our I call it the free group, because saying Healthy Nervous System Revolution Facebook group is a mouthful. The HNSR group, as we call it in our team. So they want to know, and it looks like Alex is a body worker of sorts and works with people with their viscera, so their gut and their fascia. And they want to know, I'm curious about transference and countertransference. So how do we remain in our center around people that are dysregulated when we are hardwired in our systems for a connective life? So this question is sort of skirting around the biology biography piece, but I will answer it because it's important. And it all interconnects in some way, shape, or form. You say you've practiced a lot of sensing yourself, orienting to your environment, etc. And you've done a lot of those practices, but I'm running into a scenario where I'm working so closely with people that I'm taking on their stuff, I'm feeling their things. And from my experience working with, really deep levels of trauma with people, working with their biologies, working with their neurophysiologies, literally touching their, putting intention into their brain stems and their organs and their kidneys and their adrenals and their heart and all of that. We need to have solid regulation in our own system. We need to have very strong boundaries about what is us and what is theirs. And we need to have some form of, at least all the people I know that stay healthy in this work, is some form of physical movement practice, usually pretty intense exercise, that helps cleanse and move stuff out of our system when we've finished work. Everyone's going to be a bit different. Some people might need to take a walk. Some people might need to dance a bit. In my old office, I have a trampoline, a little rebounder that I bounce on. I get down on the ground. I'll move a little bit. There always needs to be a bit of a separation or a way of disconnecting from that office work so that we can kind of move out of that role as being a helper, someone that's helping facilitate someone's system into the next part of our day. And how a person does that is 100%, 100% individual. I even feel like maybe I shouldn't tell you what I used to do, because that isn't going to help you necessarily. You've got to figure out what you need for your own system. And then I'm going to come back to this idea of having really strong boundaries. And when we're working with someone in such an intimate nervous system, visceral level, we will feel their emotion, their organs. Working with a lot of people that have had surgical trauma, anesthesia trauma, near-death experiences, you will taste the anesthesia. You will even feel the druggedness of something that maybe they've taken. If they're going into something called dorsal shutdown of the parasympathetic, which is the freeze state, the fight, flight, freeze, I've worked with people where I am literally nodding off, and everyone will account that this occurs when you work at this deep level. And when you start to feel that system pulling you in, that's where you as the practitioner has to be very, very, very aware of what's going on in your own system, so that you can reconnect, not really re-regulate, because we want to be regulated to begin with when we're working with people as a whole, which is super important. But we want to keep reconnecting to who we are, where we are, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if someone is working with someone and there is still unresolved, deep unresolved chronic trauma and adversity, and the practitioner is still in their own form of living under survival stress, which sadly is the case for so many people working in the healing and health worlds. I did a Q&A about this a little while ago, Alex. It's a long form Q&A specifically for the healers, the helpers, the mind body coaches. Please watch that if you haven't. I think that too many folks, and of course I don't know your history, but too many people are getting into this deep work before they've done enough of their own regulation work, and so they're getting sucked into this murky, foggy, gray zone of their client's physiology, and it can be very taxing. So just know that it really comes down to, as much as we can, being super solid in our own system, having a very strong self-care practice, good relationships in our own homes, because all of this is going to impact whether or not our clients or our students are diving into kind of gray territory with us. So I hope that helps. I'm going to come back to the comments here. Gianna asks, what are your thoughts on chiropractic care? Is it true that getting regular adjustments is helpful? I'm of two minds here. First of all, you need to make sure that the person you're working with is obviously well trained and understands what the nervous system is. I know that might seem kind of like a given if someone's manipulating a spinal column and there's a nervous system running through there, but it's important that the person that you work with is versed in stress physiology, past traumatic experiences, how this stuff gets embedded in not just the nervous system, but in the tissues, in the bone, in the muscles, in the fascia, and the viscera. I am a believer of really good manipulation, and specifically osteopathic manipulation that is a bit more gentler. Granted, there's a big but here. You as the recipient, the client, is able to track your own physiology when you are in those sessions. And what occurs, and I lived in a world where the amount of chiropractors to the amount of people in this town was out of this world. Like, it was just crazy. It was a ski town, and people were just going to the chiropractor as a way to get a quick fix and to get things back in line, because they weren't taking care of their bodies. They weren't recovering, so things were just all wonky. And so it was almost abusive the way they went and got adjusted. and didn't really figure out why and what was going on. So when we go and we have something like a manipulation, we need to ensure that we are tracking our physiology and we know that what is happening is safe to us, is useful, and isn't putting us into more of a stress response. And what often occurs, especially when someone, let's say, knows they have a history of early trauma, they know they have maybe some chronic symptoms that would be indicative of maybe a mental illness or chronic illness, is they often, and again, I'm generalizing, have a very small window of knowing safety. And in many cases, there's no safety in the system. And so the moment a person goes to touch and manipulate, they're not even aware that their body is already bracing and is already expecting the worst. And so if we go into, and it could be anything, it could be chiro, it could be massage, it could even be acupuncture. Yeah, there's so many, getting a haircut. You know, if we're not safe in our skin, there will be some element of the system going into protection mode. And the thing with chiropractic adjustments and adjustments that have more force is if our system goes into more bracing and we have that force going through, it's going to create more shock to the system, and it's as if a shearing force is going through, and then it's not helpful. So there's something to be said about making sure that a person is able to track their physiology and know what's going on, and also know when to say, you know what, please don't do that. That's not enough. But from my experience, when we have had an early history of trauma and relational traumas and not secure attachment, and it wasn't safe to say no or to show anger or aggression, we will override that and we won't say a damn thing, even though our gut is telling us, I don't like this. The person does the adjustment and then we're worse off because we were in protection mode. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I think it's helpful, and it depends on the person, and it depends on the person that's providing that treatment. Fiona says, I've just tried to formulate 3 questions, but decided they might be better for SBSM. Okay, moving on. Hello, Marloes from the Netherlands. Okay, I'm going to come to my questions here and get to the next one. So Lynn asks, hello, Lynn. Let me just have a little drink here. I completely know why you say, so there's a little bit of a precursor to this question, not to interfere with our stress physiology and observe instead. So observing the physiology, and you say in brackets, because trauma will resolve if given the right environment. That's true, given the right environment, but also that the system has enough safety internally that it can let that stuff come out. You said, I've daily practiced for 2 years with a safe container orienting, and yes, it's a journey. My question is, does guided meditation, so guided you say in all caps, so you're clearly being guided by perhaps an audio, and visualization around trauma themes contribute to healing? Not as an escape at all, but as a daily practice, like times of noticing, growing awareness of how good we feel to build resistance. So that last part I'm not 100% sure on, but I'll go to the first question, which is, will doing guided meditation and visualization contribute to healing? So the answer is it can, and it comes back to what I even said a moment ago to Alex about, are you, or is the person able to track their physiology and know where they are, and not just orienting to the room, but track, am I solidly in a state of being connected to myself and my physiology, or is there a little bit of overriding occurring where I'm not fully present to my system? So I'll explain what I mean by that. So we can be guided through a visualization around, say, a past traumatic event, I'll just use a car accident because that's one of the simpler things to use an example of. But anything that is a shock trauma, and let's just say we're doing a visualization around that car accident, and we haven't done the baseline foundational work to know that our thigh muscles starting to get really tight and almost, buzzy with energy, that's kind of the best way to describe it, is a sign that maybe that leg needs to move, that it might need to do something. And if we are not able to pick up on that cue and let go of the visualization, we may miss what's called a procedural memory wanting to come out of the physiology, out of the motor patterns that were stuck. So I use the example of a car accident because let's just say person's driving and they see something that they need to avoid, but they can't because of danger. And so their desire is to slam on the brakes, but they don't want to because there's another car right behind them. And in that moment, they decide, I'm not going to slam on the brakes. And then they end up hitting something anyway. That desire to slam on the brakes is a contraction of the muscles. It's a strong, forceful thing. And if we didn't get to do that, there is a written procedure in the nervous system, in the autonomic nervous system, in the motor nervous systems that wants to push that foot and, right? Or maybe move the steering wheel to get out of the way. We need to know these things in our current day and age as humans living in this complex world, because if we don't, we won't know in that visualization process that contraction could be the system knocking on your door saying, hey, you need to do this movement so that you complete this shock trauma and this procedure to bring yourself to safety. So this is where that understanding of what a procedural memory is, and I've just sort of described it, and how to track that might come up. Now, I just described one way that might come up. There might be little twitches in the shoulders. There might be the eyes having a strong desire to close. There might be tears that start to burgeon up that have to do with the tears that were never cried when you had to put a pet down because you didn't want to cry in front of whoever, right? And so there's so many, choose your own adventure really here. The thing that I'm saying is, again, nothing wrong with a visualization. I teach that in my program, SmartBody SmartMind, and in my 21-day nervous system tune-up. I guide people to feel and sense their bodies, their organs, their joints, their diaphragms, their brain stems, their guts, all of it. And we work towards also following an impulse, if an impulse arises, to do something that may be resemblant of an old trauma that is wanting to work through. The other thing is to be also aware, because some of us might not have big shock traumas that we're trying to resolve. Maybe it's early adversity and not having solid regulation built in from the start of our nervous system, which is indicative and very common when we are struggling with things like mental illness, anxiety, depression, social anxiety, chronic illnesses, et cetera, et cetera. So if we didn't have baseline regulation to begin with, there can sometimes be an overriding with these visualizations and meditations where we're missing the mark on what's actually happening in the physiology. And again, most of the time, I'm doing lots of generalizations here, we're doing practices that are too advanced for where the physiology is able to be. And there's a question that someone asked about neuroplasticity, and I might get into that next because that applies perfectly with this, and that we're doing a lot of higher based visualizations and meditations, and we're not learning the basic ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of how to listen to our physiology and the stress responses there. So I hope that answers that question for you, Lynn. I'm going to put that away so I don't look at it again, so I don't get confused about where I am. Felicity is on live right now, and you ask, can you talk about resourcing clients when adverse memories appear in nonverbal bodywork sessions? I can and I can't, because this is more of a consult-based question, Felicity. Here's the thing. This comes down to scope of practice. So I really encourage you to listen to the Q&A I did maybe 2 weeks ago on what it means to be trauma-informed versus trauma-trained. So if there are memories coming up, and I'm going to assume that the memories are visual and it's nonverbal body work, if we have got the skill to work with that, then we can work with it. But if our training is in body work, we need to basically contain the situation, connect with the person, ask them what they need, and then perhaps refer them out to someone that can work with these traumatic adverse memories. And the reason why I say this, and I'm very careful about this, is there are a lot of people right now, because trauma is a hot topic, and we are now seeing that when we get really good body work, and I have no doubt that if a therapist or a body worker is very safe and regulated in their own system, that opens up the floodgates for the person on our table to start releasing and feeling and expressing and sharing. So again, to borrow something from my mentor, Kathy Kane, who is not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but is a body worker and teaches people these high-level pieces of working with somatic trauma, is, you know, be a human being first and foremost. So connect, ask the person what they need. And if we don't know what to do, we probably shouldn't be doing it. That's, you know, being very honest there. And this is where, if you do want to work with people to help them with these memories, then I highly suggest doing more training so that you have that skill set. And the reason I say that is, if we don't have a repertoire in our own physiology and in our own cognitive skill set level from training, we may presume that if someone's having a memory of or is having a sensation in, say, their groin, in their sexual organ area, that that just must be sexual trauma, for example, and that is not true, right? Or if someone is all of a sudden feeling like they're getting sleepy, that that is because of surgical trauma. That is not necessarily true. And so we have to learn how to really distinguish these different states of physiology. And really, it all comes down to, if you don't have the scope of practice to work with specific traumatic events, stick with the basics, ask the person. And this is where you can do a lot if you just keep the person contained and ask them, do you want to keep going? Do you want to sit up? You know, can you sense the ground under you? What is it like? Like, what is your system wanting? But the moment we go into trying to figure it out, we've crossed over a boundary that we probably shouldn't. And it really comes down to safety, not only for them, but for you as the practitioner. So scope of practice is something that isn't talked about very much, but I think it's very important for us to know where our skill set ends and where it is. And so basic things are what I talk about a lot of the times in my free resources. Can they feel the table? Can they sense parts of their body? You know, stay within your scope. If you're working with the body, you can talk about the body, but the moment it gets into the trauma pieces, it gets a little sticky, a little tricky. Okay. Thank you for all your comments. Thanks for the links, Crystal. Okay, I'm going to come back to there. I'm going to get to a question that was asked by Lydia on neuroplasticity. So Lydia asks, can you expand and explain neuroplasticity and how it applies to healing pain. So I'm going to assume you mean healing physical chronic pain. So basically, neuroplasticity is a neutral word. Neuroplasticity is the capacity for our entire system, not just our nervous system, but the nerves attached to everything. So neuroplastic. Plasticity basically means plastic. Like if you take plastic, you can, a plastic bag, you can bend, you can melt, you can mold it. It's moldable very easily. So it means that the system, the neurology, the nervous systems, and all that they touch can be changed. It's changeable. So addiction, for example, is because of neuroplasticity, but so is forming a new habit, or tying our shoes, or learning a language, or forgetting a language, right? If we don't use it, we're not going to keep it. That kind of old adage, use it or lose it, is very proper with this. In terms of healing pain, I'm going to make another assumption that this isn't acute pain. So acute pain means I just burned my hand on the toaster oven and it really hurts. That is an acute injury, like a broken bone would be an acute injury, or I have a bruise on my hip right now, and it hurts. That's acute pain. Chronic pain is a little different. Usually there is no more injury site. There is no, well, burns are different. So if someone is recovering from severe burns, that is another piece that involves the skin and that being maybe healed, but there's almost this phantom pain, if you will. So phantom pain and that kind of pain is another category in itself, but we'll stick to, let's just say there's no injury. It's just this pervasive chronic pain in the system. This is very indicative of people who have what we're labeling now as fibromyalgia, for example. And what we've seen, and what Peter Levine, one of my mentors, and some of his colleagues, namely Robert Scare, I know I mentioned his name in a call the other day, is his book here? Yes, it is. This book, Trauma Spectrum, by Robert Scare. Oh, look, even the foreword is by Peter Levine. Great book in terms of talking about and explaining the physiological manifestations of chronic pain. But what he feels and Peter feels and I've seen is that, and I'll talk about neuroplasticity in a second, is that these chronic pain responses are a result of the system being caught in nervous system dysregulation. So we've got this nervous system that is autonomic, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The sympathetic is that fight flight. It's the increase the blood pressure, increase the heart rate, eyes are wide, looking for danger, looking to fight, looking to flee. The parasympathetic has many branches, but the one responsible for shutting us down and protecting us, and putting us into that very kind of deep shutdown freeze state is very energy consuming. It's like trying to stop a freight train, right? Freight train, if you think about it, well, any train really, they're heavy, they're going fast. If you try to stop that thing, it takes a lot of energy. I'm thinking of Superman right now in my mind, right? Trying to stop those trains in those old movies. And it takes a lot of energy. So if you've got this fight, flight, freeze going, so fight, flight is going, and then you've got this parasympathetic shutdown, there is like a lot of energy happening and it's exhausting to the system. So that's one thing. And what occurs is when you have this cycling of this deep shutdown along with this fast fight, flight, the system is in this flux of this continuous kind of cycling of back and forth, and it's the simplest way I can say it is there's chaos in the system. And that chaos is causing chronic constriction and a lot of opening of blood vessels. And it's just like this mess. Very technical term, I know. And that mess, that dysregulation, that's the proper word, can cause these pain responses, because underneath in the blood vessels, there is this constriction, dilation, and it can't make up its mind. And that is where we can get these chronic pain responses that we call, and they call, and Peter calls, and we call in SE world. It's like a kindling response. Kindling. Kindling is that term where we build a fire and we put kindling, dry wood, to get it sparked and going faster. So when we have this dysregulation in the system, and we have had, there's also connection with pre-verbal early trauma where we're being subjected to fear, threat, not being taken care of enough. Our system is in this flux of not knowing what to do. Should I fight? Should I freeze? Should I fight? Should I freeze? Maybe I'll freeze, then I'll fight. And it's that dysregulation that causes this chaos. And that is where not only do we get things like chronic pain, but gut troubles, reproductive troubles, immune system, endocrine. And it's essentially this chaos. I've been using the analogy of a symphony, like an orchestra, when you go to the music and the symphony is there, and when you go to a symphony, they're practicing and tuning their instruments, and it makes no sense. There's no tune. There's no Beethoven's Ninth playing. It's just crazy, right? And then the conductor comes in and he or she puts up the thing. I don't know what it's called. My husband's going to kill me because he's a musician and a composer. But he puts his little stick up and everyone stops. And then they wait. And then he conducts. And then he teaches them, guides them to make this beautiful flowing music. It stops, it gets big, it shifts, it changes. That is like our nervous system. We want it to have that flow. But when there isn't a good conductor, when there isn't that nervous system, that higher part of or that more unconscious part of our brain, I should say, that's governing our system, it's going to be in chaos. So that's my long preamble to how does neuroplasticity work towards healing pain. We have to, if you think about that symphony, we have to get to know all the instruments. We have to know who's on which one, who's there, and that would be getting to know your digestion, getting to know the response of your heart, getting to know yourself better in relationship to the environment and your own physical somatic self. So part of the neuroplastic healing process, I call it neuroplastic healing sequencing, is starting with the basics, starting with, can you connect to yourself? Can you connect to the environment? Can you follow your impulses in a way that's really basic? So if you've heard me talk a lot of times, you know that I talk about one of the very first things we teach our students when we're learning in SmartBody SmartMind is how to follow impulse. And that isn't to eat all the cookies in the cookie jar. It's to listen to when you need to go to the bathroom. It's to listen when you need to take a sip of water because your throat is dry. To listen when you're hungry to eat, and when you're full to stop. If someone you're talking to is not, or if, let's just say it this way, if you're wanting to say something to someone and you're not letting that impulse out, start doing more of that. If you're feeling an emotion come up and you hold it back, let it out. We know, or I know, people know, the research has shown that when we hold an emotion, it creates toxicity and more pain inside, because that emotion is blocking. If we don't let it out, it blocks energy. Again, Peter Levine will often say pain is trapped sensation. Say it one more time. Pain is trapped sensation. Sensation is the beginning of emotion. The sensations are what we want to get better at, because when we track them and follow them, they will lead us to these trapped responses and allowing them to come out. So part of healing pain is starting with those basic foundational levels of knowing how to be with what is here and know when to pause. Because if we have had a lot of early pre-verbal trauma where the world was a dangerous place and it was too painful to feel our insides, we also can't do too much of it at one sitting, because it can overflood our system and it can ramp up and positively feedback that pain response to be higher. So it's a very fine art of moving a little bit towards feeling, but then pausing so the system can digest, and then doing a little bit more, and then pausing, doing a little bit more, pausing, and working in what we would call a titrated way so that we are able to be with the emotion, the sensations, the biology, the impulses, tracking our behavior, these things. And then in terms of how we sequence neuroplasticity so that we can heal chronic pain, that foundation is super important. Building capacity is super important. Lydia, if you haven't watched the healing trauma videos, in the first video, I give an analogy of a swimming pool. I won't repeat it right now, but watch that. I talk about capacity building and what that means. Often when we're living in chronic pain, there is, like I said, this dysregulation of the nervous system, and the system doesn't know how to process what is there, and it just gets trapped, and then it just feels like chaos, and then the system goes on fire. And so we're literally trying to slow it down, slow the system down, work with the physiology, feel it, but also work with it in small enough doses so it doesn't overwhelm us and cause more pain. I hope that makes sense. Okay. I'm going to move that over there. The other thing too about neuroplasticity is consistency. So there's a tendency in our world, and I think it's because of the way that we have treated a lot of medical conditions, that we take, say, a course of antibiotics, and then at the end of 10 days, the infection is gone, we hope, and then that's it. We don't keep taking them. Or you go in for a surgical procedure, you get a mole removed, you get it removed, it's fine, it's not cancerous, it heals, end of story. This is different. And so often, and in reading some of Norman Doidge's books, especially in The Brain's Way of Healing, he talks about neuroplastic healing, and I talk about in one of my ebooks, and Crystal can pop that up. And there's a video on the 5 stages of neuroplastic healing. So I encourage everybody to watch that and listen to that. That there's a tendency, Doidge says, for people to stop too soon. And too soon could be stopping within a year. And this is where it gets frustrating for clients and patients in the medical world, is that they're not seeing the results fast enough. And if we think about how complex the human system is, and if we know we have a history, a biography, if you will, that is riddled with stress and adversity and unsafety, and our generations before us had that, we have to assume this isn't going to be something that is just gone in a week or in 3 months or in 6 months. Will there be changes in those time frames? Absolutely. But we have to keep working at it and working at it. If you think about some of the natural wonders of the world that have been built, that we know through human force and endeavor and hands, churches and artwork, it takes time to build a masterpiece. And you might not see anything that you can write home about within even the first 5 years. But it's being worked on slowly and slowly and slowly. And this is where trust and hope and faith and doing it for the right reasons, which are to feel better and to be healthy and to live a more independent and free life, are the goals. And we're not going to see it immediately. It's like someone who's trying to lose extra weight, extra body fat. It doesn't happen in a month. It doesn't even happen in a year. It takes time, and it takes consistency. And even when we get to our goal, we have to continue to have lifestyle factors that provide that goodness to our system. So it's very similar. Okay. I've talked about epigenetics a little bit. Basically, I already mentioned this in terms of the biography, the biology, how our biology is impacted by our biography. We know through the epigenetic research that trauma can be passed through our genetics, but that does not mean that we will succumb to that genetic predisposition. It has to do with what we do in our living, breathing life, how our environment and how we are nurturing ourselves. what was I going to say? If I think about people that I know, like my husband, I talk about Seth a lot. He gives me free rein to talk about him. You know, he grew up with not the best upbringing, and not all of his siblings have come out healthy. One even passed away when he was really young due to stress, due to cancer. That didn't happen to him. If he hadn't have gotten into this work, met me, which is the honest truth, and he will say this, and started doing this work, really hard work of dealing with these early traumas. He was an incubator baby. He was born premature. If that hadn't been worked on, he knows that he would be sick. He may not even be still here, because the genetics were so strong in the environment. The biography was that bad. But the way that he healed the biology as an adult has made it such that those predispositions that run in his family for mental illness, cardiovascular problems, diabetes, he doesn't have them, right? So how we express our genetics it's very much, from what we've seen, a result of how we take care of ourselves and how we heal our traumas. And I don't think there's any coincidence that the ACE study, so the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that has shown conclusively, and this is epidemiology, which means they're studying trends over tens and tens of thousands of people. When there is early adversity and it is not treated, the likelihood, the strong probability of becoming ill in some form of mental illness, chronic illness, risky addictive behaviors, arthritis, cancer, heart disease, addiction, you name it. So many things are connected to how much adversity we had in our early years. And that's so conclusive in terms of the fact that they've done that research multiple places around the world, and it's coming out with the same results. That's epidemiology. It's very different than running a study where you're trying to control the factors and study one thing. So that's why that ACE study is hot news. It's very important. And it shows that the predisposition for certain things will get expressed when we have stress and trauma that is not resolved. Okay. I'm going to get to some questions here, and then I've got two more on my paper. I'm going to have a little drink. Ella asks, hey Irene, we've always hear about flashbacks in regards of negative experience, but are there also those in regards of pleasant experiences and feelings? I want to ask, what is the meaning, purpose of positive flashbacks and what triggers them? I have no idea what triggers them, Ella. I get them every day. I had one just the other day. I forget what it was. I was doing something that had nothing in connection to this memory where I was in Italy when I was 21 with my first boyfriend. We were at a campground, and I thought about it, and I had this lovely feeling of, oh, that was so nice. And I wasn't doing anything that was connected to Italy. I wasn't eating pasta. I wasn't camping. It just poofed into my memory banks. And this happens, I think, to many of us. So, and I think it's something to say, in many ways, it shows how complex our brain is, how complex our memory banks are, just like the dream state, the amount of things that I dream. I don't know where the heck those things come from. I'm sure a lot of us who remember our dreams will be flabbergasted at what our brain creates when we're sleeping at night. So I'm not sure. I don't know if we'll ever figure that out. So yeah, I've experienced that, and I'm sure lots of people have too. Let me just open up this question. Fiona asks, it is my sense, both through your teaching and my experience, that basically all practices are going to be dysregulated if experienced through the lens of dysregulation in the nervous system. Pretty much, yeah, that's a good assumption. Thus, the specific practice is 100% foundation for all their practices. I believe that, Fiona. This doesn't mean that what I teach and do in my programs is the be-all, end-all. I still recommend that people exercise and eat well, and they need some body work to get some body work, or they need to see a talk therapist to talk to someone about a problem that they're having or a communication issue. That is all premised on this baseline foundation of regulation in the nervous system. You say, I wonder if you truly believe there is any practice which will support nervous system regulation if you are trying to be polite and respectful by not seeming to denigrate other practices. Is your personal true belief that this practice should stand alone for quite some time before adding any other modalities? I think everyone's going to be really individual, Fiona, and you've got to take that on a case-by-case basis. There's a question here, I think it was here, that I'll address that. Or I don't know if it's a question, but more of an experience that someone shared that I will see if I have time to recount. But I think everyone's different. Like if someone knows that I'm going to give you a totally random example. Let's say someone has a diabetes, and I know one of my students in SPSM does. Like type 1 diabetes, needs to take insulin. If they don't get it, they'll die. So that's pretty black and white. So they still have to take something to get insulin. So I'm not going to say to someone, don't take it because the problem is rooted in nervous system dysregulation. We don't know. There could have been, something truly genetically defectively wrong that didn't allow the pancreas cells to produce insulin. Maybe there was an infection when they were really young. I don't know. So that person has to take the medical precautions to stay healthy and not go into diabetic coma. And they've also done the work of SmartBody SmartMind and regulating and becoming more whole with themselves. I know through conversing with this person that their system is way more healthy now in general because they've added in the healing of other traumas and other things that were putting the system in dysregulation that are separate from the need for insulin. So everyone's got to look at their own personal situation, their own biology, their own biography, to come back to the theme of this, and know what they need. I am someone that has had too many shock traumas to count on all of my fingers and all of my toes and all of the bones in my body. And so I am someone that knows that I need to get body work so that I keep certain things in check. And in addition to that, that body work is very potent, and my physical therapist will say so because I sense things so acutely and I can correct things really quickly with the help of her observed eye, right? So again, I would not stop something that might be helping a person if it's helping and if it's done in a regulated, safe way. Then I think combining this nervous system work with that is very important. And if we talk to people like Peter and Kathy and a lot of these mentors of mine, they will say that it is important to have a team of people if someone is struggling with a chronic illness or a really severe orthopedic injury or something where the system has really been gravely affected by something on the outside and it's impacting them. We need to have a team of people to help with the extraneous things or the internal things that might need help. So I think they both go hand in hand. And when we have that baseline foundation, a lot of the other stuff is just that much more potent. Fiona says, you are able to track your own physiology within the session. Yes, I think I know what you mean. Basically, here's the thing. This is for the people who work with people. We need, as practitioners, to be able to track our own physiology. If we can't, dare I say, we shouldn't be doing work with other people. Because if we can't track our physiology, we are modeling for them a dysregulated, disconnected system. And I think this is where we've been clumsy and maybe not as stringent with training and producing practitioners in this world, is we're not demanding that there is like the version of pre-med or pre-law, the way you would if you were to become a medical doctor or a lawyer. Those are the two easiest ones I can think of. There needs to be pre-work before we get into this work, and that doesn't exist right now. Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Fiona asks, talking about biology and biography, what are your thoughts on the impacts of a mother's chronic stress on the baby in utero? Can any impacts be resolved through wonderful, secure parenting? Of course they can. And I think that the stress is very relative. A baby needs to, or a growing human within a mother needs to feel movement and ups and downs of her stress response, so they are building their system in the way that they are. It depends on the level of stress. It depends on, is that stress based on utter fear for her life, or is it positive stress? So everyone's going to be different, and a lot can change and happen and rewire when there is secure parenting and attached parenting. And the natural way in which we raise humans is so skewed because of all of the theories and all of the science and all of the speculations about what a human system needs. And I said this in a call maybe last week, we really all need the same thing. We need attachment, we need security, we need safety, it's not even so much love, it's just safety, right? We need to have a safe, connected, adult, mature nervous system, or it could be a teenager or an older sibling, someone that can let that immature organism know, I'm here, I've got you, and I feel you, I see you, and I'm helping you figure out your own impulses. And when we break it down to those levels, it's actually quite simple, but we overcomplicate it with too much head science-y stuff. So yes, most things can get resolved with that. Now, of course, if a baby is born with a massive genetic defect and maybe they had to have heart surgery, which happens a lot of the time, and they've gone through that kind of trauma, it will be important for a parent who wants to really help that one to seek out some good early trauma practitioner, body worker, to help that little one resolve the stored traumatic stress from that surgery, let's just say. And if there's a really attuned parent that understands what procedural memories are and understands that healthy aggression is an important part of natural infant development, you might not need to find a specialized practitioner, because the person, you, the parent, or whoever it is, might just know how to intuitively see, oh, this little one is trying to punch her fists at me, and that's her trying to push away the doctors who are putting tubes in her. But if we aren't aware of how these things are trapped in our body, we won't know how to see it. And this is where I think a lot can be learned via just getting very well, getting very trauma informed, and I like to say in the right way, so that we can pick out these things. Okay, going to get to another question here. This is from Anne. She wrote this to us in our Healthy Nervous System Revolution Facebook group. She wants to know about inflammation. So I'm wondering, stress is linked to inflammation in the body, but cortisol has an anti-inflammatory effect. Yes, you are right. So do you know how this can be explained? So I do. And I'm actually going to read something from Gabor Mate's book, because he writes it so much more eloquently than I could speak it right now. But basically, inflammation is caused by many things, but stress is a big part of it. Chronic stress is a big part of it. And if we are not going into really solid, what we call rest digest mode, this is something that probably many of you have heard, if we're not going into good solid rest digest mode at night when we're sleeping, and we are having sleep that is highly dysregulated, highly interrupted, or is maybe dead to the world sleep where we're passed out and we're in like a deep shutdown, we will not get cell repair happening. Our immune system won't plump up the system and recover it. Our gut lining won't get stitched back up at night due to the wear and tear of daily processes. All of that contributes to the system just not getting restorative and reparative rest at night when we sleep. So when we have got that chronic stress all the time, if we just leave cortisol out of this for a second, the inflammation in the body will kind of creep up because we're not getting that rest, repair, immune enhancing quality that we should get when we're sleeping at night. Now, the other thing is that cortisol is important to a certain degree, but if the cortisol is being pumped out left, right, and center because of high chronic stress, it will impact the tissues of the body and is toxic on the tissues. It's toxic to the brain. It's toxic to the lining of the blood vessels. It causes inflammation when it is overly excessive. And then what occurs because of this chronic stress response, maybe we're not healed from our early traumas and we're literally always looking for danger because that's how we were brought up. The system gets to a point where it's like, I can't keep pumping out this cortisol. No more, there's no more left. And this is where we would call it that burnout, that overwhelm, that adrenal burnout, that chronic fatigue. And people will have this flat line of cortisol. So there isn't that healthy dose of cortisol that can help with the system and bringing it down. So it's this funny interaction. And we know most of us have heard of a steroid cream or taking a steroid because there's an inflammatory response. If you have a massive rash or some form of inflammation, a doctor will often put a person on a cortisone or a steroid or something that brings the inflammation down. And so it's confusing because that's a synthetic steroid, which is a cortisol product, and yet we're saying, but cortisol, if we're giving cortisol to the system, cortisone to bring the inflammation down, wouldn't lots of cortisol bring the inflammation down? And that's not true. So this is from, you guys see that? Oop, Post-it note. When the Body Says No. This is a Gabor Mate book. So I'm just going to read this. And hopefully this gives you a little food for thought. This is page 182. So this is a bit, so bear with me, it's reading time. So the chronic features of autoimmune disease involve the entire, and this is where we call it the psychoneuroimmunology. So this is a term that was coined quite a while ago where the psychology, the neurology, and the immune system all connect. We take it one step further, we know that that connects with the environment, but he doesn't say that, but we know that's true. So there's this involvement of this PNI supersystem, particularly the brain hormone immune connections. So the hypothesis that stress-induced psychoneuroimmunology imbalances are physiologically responsible for the onset and flare-ups of autoimmune conditions, it rests on abundant research evidence. So we know this. So elaborations of the mechanisms by which stress acts through this psychoneuroimmunology system to cause autoimmune illness would involve too much scientific detail for our purposes. Suffice it to say that the body's stress apparatus, so the fight, flight, freeze, and particularly the production of the key hormone cortisol becomes imbalanced through chronic overstimulation. So I want to tie that back in. That's that early adversity. That's the trauma that occurred that we never resolved. That's living in an abusive environment, a toxic environment, not feeling safe, not being able to emote what we're feeling. So recall that normal cortisol secretion by the adrenals regulates the immune system and dampens the inflammatory reactions triggered by the products of the immune cells. So, like I just said, normal cortisol helps us bring the inflammation down. But in rheumatoid arthritis, that's a form of autoimmune, there are lower than normal cortisol responses to stress. So in RA, rheumatoid arthritis, there are lower than normal cortisol responses to stress. We can see why then there would be disordered immune activity and excess inflammation. And we know through the ACE study that rheumatoid arthritis is one of the key chronic illnesses we see when there's early adversity and there hasn't been healing of that trauma. So on the one hand, the immune system escapes from normal cortisol and attacks the body to cause inflammation. And then on the other hand, the required anti-inflammatory responses are weakened and ineffective. So the system is in that, again, that example of the symphony. There's no conductor. It's chaos and there's just stress. It is surely no coincidence that one medication consistently used in autoimmune conditions is an adrenal corticosteroid, cortisol, or more accurately, its synthetic analog. So that would be the cortisones that we would get, the injections. Cortisol is the hormone most central to the stress response and the one that studies show to be the most dysregulated after chronic stress. So, Anne, good question. This is what's going on. It isn't cut and dry because when there is this chronic stress, this unresolved trauma in the system, it isn't just impacting the hormones. Those chemicals are impacting the tissues, the organs, the brain, etc. So that is the answer to that question for you. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight. And you might be asking, well, what do we do to heal this? And it comes back down to, I'm sounding like a broken record, foundations, building capacity in the nervous system, getting ourselves out of that stress response in little bits. We cannot just turn the stress response off like a light switch when it's been on for so long. It takes time. It takes what I call learning a new language. And I did a video on this a little while ago. If you haven't watched that, please do. It was a very popular one. It's like learning a new language as an adult, second language. Takes time to rebuild this back up. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the questions here. I'm gonna end pretty shortly, you guys, because we've been going for about an hour and a half. Let's see here. How do I know when I'm regulated enough to go into the helping profession where I'll be able to help others process trauma? Mindy, I think this is super individual, and I mean, if one of the key indicators is that a person can stay in their system, be regulated, and hear really bad stuff, really bad stories, and stay completely there. And I remember someone saying a little while ago in a comment, well, what do we do if we are with a client and they give us their history and it triggers us? And is it good for us to say, I just need a moment to settle? No. If we are being triggered by our client's history, we should not be doing that level of work. A person who comes to us with a history that is extreme, and there's a lot of extreme histories, it has to come to us in a, okay, thanks for telling me that, now let's get to work. If we show any form of fear, triggering, disgust, and really display, oh my God, I can't, that will put the person to feeling that they are not safe and that their story is too much for you. And this is where I have found that the more robust we are in our system, the higher level of traumas will come to us. And it's just part of the package. That isn't always the rule, but it tends to be the rule. So I think we will know because our system is in good health. We have good relationships. We are able to move forward and have healthy life force aggression. I think one of the things that I have seen has been the most damaging to a lot of clients that I see or students that I see is they'll go to practitioners who are not healthy in their own aggression. They don't know how to work with their own anger. And so when that client brings their stored anger to the table, it frightens the practitioner, and that is not good either. So I think there needs to be a healthy, robust situation where we're fairly regulated. Does not mean that we have processed all of our traumas. This is an important distinction. We can be still processing trauma, but be highly regulated. I would fit that category. I'm still processing all my old stuff from all my days of doing shit I shouldn't have been doing when I was a kid, and being exposed to things I shouldn't have been exposed to, but I have regulation. And that will be determined by each person and their history. So I wish I could give you like, this is when you'll know. I think intuitively you'll know. And the other thing is to just keep doing your work. I did a vlog a little while ago, Mindy, called How to Find a Good Somatic Practitioner. Watch that, because that gives you some hints to what I think a person should be looking for in a somatic practitioner. Okay, let's see here. How does a body-based therapist recognize their unconscious material? I'm wondering, as an analyst, I got trained to work with transference and I was analyzed, but the healing process of trauma, in my body did not happen sufficiently, so I continue to work with the body. I think maybe I just answered that question for you, Tina. We'll have stuff that we still are healing, but the question is can we be really solidly attuned and connected to our clients? Can we stay regulated when we're working with them? I was listening to Peter Levine talk on a conference just yesterday that I'm a part of this week, the Embodied Conference. Check that out if you guys haven't yet. It's ending on Saturday. But he was even talking, he's in his mid-70s. He was talking about how when he goes to Switzerland each summer, he works with an analyst to work on dreams and work on some of the stuff that he's still processing. So, I don't know if in our day and age now we will ever be 100% finished working through this stuff, because we haven't yet seen a generation of people who were raised the way it was supposed to happen. So there is something to be said about knowing that to do this work means that we really need to be in for the long haul, and recognize that, and to not be defeated by that, but to really be like, okay, this is the reality. And I'm still amazed at the things that my system is processing, even after all of the work I do, all of the healthy relationships I have, etc. I'm just looking through some of the things here. Apologies if I have not gotten to your question. I'm going to get to this final question by Rachel, and then I will call it quits for today, you guys. Rachel asks, if sleep is such a natural process, why haven't I been able to sleep for 25 years without prescription medication? And can this be resolved? I'm losing hope. What is wrong with my biology? So as a general whole, something in your system is still not safe. There's something that doesn't want to go into the unconscious. There's something that is essentially still looking for danger. And I don't know what that is, because you know your biography, you know what has happened. But the things I would ask if I was working with a client at this level would be, was there any birth trauma? Was there a premature birth? Were you in an incubator? Was there surgeries where you were put under anesthesia? Was there an awakening during a surgery? Did you ever have any near-death experiences, near drownings, things where the system went into what we would call a global high intensity reaction in the somatic experiencing world? Basically where the system is like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And I'm going to prepare for that by going into a strong reactive response of protection. So that's one example. If there was a general unsafety growing up, because not necessarily because we were abused, but maybe our parent was mentally unwell, was physically chronically unwell, and they really couldn't take care of us, that leaves an infant to feel unsafe and to not fully be able to let their guard down. That will carry with us into our world, and the work to do to heal this and to resolve this is very delicate, and it is very fine, and it is something that we get into within SmartBody SmartMind. I don't get into this level of early trauma regulation work in the 21-day nervous system tune-up, which is the basic course that I have. It is a much more refined process of working with the stress organs, working with, it could be the viscera. Again, if there was a surgical process that occurred that sent us into this high level of threat, the tissues, the immune system, it isn't just the nervous system, it is the entire physiological processes are on alert. And so it takes time. I'm just having an image of a big ball of yarn that's all tied up. It takes time to unravel that and repack it. And so I can imagine that if someone hasn't been able to sleep for 25 years, that it would be absolutely exhausting. And it comes back to you're right, it is a natural process when we are safe. So something is in the system that is not quite safe enough to go into that unconsciousness, that subconsciousness of sleep. So that's a very important thing. I don't know your history. You know your history better than anybody. And from what I've seen, the level of working at the stress organs, I did a vlog on this a little while ago, Rachel, be sure to watch that. Crystal can pop that up. Working at the level of the stress organs, literally reteaching the system and helping it realize that it is safe at a biological level. It's not enough to repeat it in our mind. And even if we have an environment where we have, let's just say, a safe home, we have maybe safe husband or safe wife or safe caregivers, we live in a very safe neighborhood. If that underlying biology is still in memory of the past experiences, it will be as if it was yesterday. And that's what will keep us from fully settling and going into that restorative sleep phase. So I hope that gives you a little more education and insight. Movement is also very important. I know that that can be tough when we might have, say, a chronic illness, but I've also seen in our culture and our society that us humans, as an aside, we don't move enough. We don't expend enough energy in the day that gives us that healthy exhaustion. We tend to be so mental, and because we're not using and flushing toxins out of our system through movement and through getting our heart rate up and our breath rate up, that can also impact our ability to fully rest at night because we haven't used enough energy, and it's just a sort of stagnant state that our system is in all day. When I teach my up and down workshops with Ilya Marak, something that I do June to December, people will often say that they sleep so well after those workshops because never in their life have they spent 5 hours being mindful and moving their bodies in a day, right? They might go to the gym for an hour, they might go for a hike on a weekend or a walk, but really being connected with the body and moving it is in some ways rerouting our thinking process and all the rumination and all the stress, and it's getting moved through the system. And also people are just exhausted physically at the end of the day because they've done more movement than they have in maybe 4 months. So that's another thing that's important, is to make sure that we're getting good activity and good movement through our joints and muscles, etc. I'm going to end it here. We've talked about a lot. I didn't fully get into that idea of the brain being an end organ, but we can leave that for next time. The main premise of that is that our brain is like any other organ in our system. It has an important process, but so does our heart, so does our liver, so do our kidneys, so does our spleen, pancreas, gallbladder, lungs, etc. All the organs are important, but the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, those stress responses, it funnels out and floods the organs, the brain being one of them. So while a lot of practices might focus on changing things in the brain, what we're really wanting to do is to reroute how our stress response acts and reacts, or might be in reaction as a result of our biography. So this is where that idea of working with the biology is super key. So thanks for all of you who've stuck with me the full time that we've been here. You are welcome, everyone. As I said at the very beginning, this is a very time-sensitive part of the year. On February 17th, which isn't this Monday, but the next, we open up registration for SmartBody SmartMind, which is my signature online program that teaches you how to work with this nervous system level, with the body, with the physiology. It's a lot of theory, it's a lot of goodness, it's a lot of practice. It's a lot of support. It's a lifetime membership. We run it live once a year. When you join, you get to come back and redo the course with us when we run it the next year. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to do that. If you have not started the Healing Trauma series, please do that. If you're here wanting to learn about the nervous system, there is no reason to not watch those videos. They are 100% free. And we already are getting emails by people saying that just by doing the training videos, they're already noticing changes in their life and in their physiology, because this stuff seeps in a very sneaky, tricky way. So it's a good kind of magic. And I've also got a drop-in class next Saturday at 12 p.m., February 15th. That is a low-fee option if you want to test out working with me in a different way. It's a $19 class. You get the recording afterwards, and it's a way to just sort of test out the waters if you want to not fully commit right yet, but you want to just see what it's like to do a little bit of stuff. That is one way that you can start slow and titrate your experience here. So thank you so much to all of the 39 people, 50 people that have been here. I'm going to end the video, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.